Welcome to the Texas Success Initiative Assessment 2 Proctor Training, or TSIA 2 for short. My name is Lisa Reniger, the Administrator for Research and Evaluation at the district, and I support the TSIA 2 at the district level. This training today is meant to help prepare you for your first experience when proctoring the TSIA 2 test. The learning objectives for this session are as follows. Learn about the suite of assessments and their functions in identifying student skills and abilities. Learn about proctor eligibility and responsibilities. Learn to prepare students for test day by explaining what to expect and guiding them to the free practice resources. Learn how to navigate the testing platform and the various methods for proctoring the suite of assessments. Learn about the accommodation tools available for students with learning and/or physical disabilities. The training topics for today's session include basic information about the tests, proctoring eligibility and responsibilities, test administration, and the student experience and resources for TSIA 2. As you move through this training session, if you have specific questions, please make a note of them and email specific questions to Lisa Reniger, lreniger@seisd.net, or from our high school, Brenda Payadas, bpayadas@seisd.net. We will begin by sharing basic information on the purpose and structure of the TSIA 2 test. Let's begin with an overview of the new tests, and I will go into more detail over the following slides. The TSIA 2 is a suite of online, internet-based computer adaptive tests designed for Texas public institutions of higher education to determine if entering non-exempt students are ready for entry-level college coursework in the areas of English language arts and reading and mathematics. Accommodated versions are available for these tests upon approval of the IHE for those students with documented need. We know that studying for placement tests matters, so there's new content in the study app for the new tests. Additionally, the practice app has been moved to the AccuPlacer platform to allow students to practice with the same look and feel as the actual tests. Also available is TSIA 2 Learning Resources, which allows students and educators access to free instructional and practice materials aligned to TSIA 2 test content. I'll talk more about this later. The student portal provides improved transportability of test results. In addition to locating a test center and accessing free practice resources, the student portal allows students to access their test scores and have their scores sent directly to institutions, 3 at a time, completely free of charge. Students may also send scores directly to institutions, 3 at a time, from the demographic page prior to starting their test. Institutions will access scores sent to them by creating an institutional reporter and/or score reporter role for their staff. These user roles allow a person to view the shared ISRs. The institutional score reporter can manage their email notifications for scores being sent to them from the institutional profile page. The first slide provided an overview of the new tests, and this slide compares them with the original version. Since the development of TSIA 1 in 2013, Texas state standards have been revised. These new tests, scheduled to launch on January 11, 2021, were created to be in alignment with the current state standards and to reflect changes in curriculum. As with TSIA 1, TSIA 2 also has classification and diagnostic assessments for each subject area. Students begin testing in the classification tests, and the respective diagnostic test is administered if they do not meet the college readiness benchmark. With the goal of reducing testing, these new tests include the creation of one integrated reading and writing CRC test instead of 2 separate tests, and the creation of one diagnostics test per subject area instead of 2 separate tests for DE and ABE. Those higher ed institutions that utilize AccuPlacer classic tests for ESL and higher level math will need to transition to their next generation equivalents, which will require changes to your branching profiles and placement rules at the time of the next TSIA2 launch. Additionally, the new assessments include practice that is now reflective of the actual testing experience and access to TSIA2 learning resources, which are free online learning supports for both students and educators. Custom access is available for students not reaching the college readiness benchmarks. These tools were created to provide students with support to strengthen their skills. The TSIA2 learning resources can be used in conjunction with high school college ready prep courses or TSIA college ready classes and workshops. The tests are the same price and will still be administered on the same platform. TSIA2 has been added to the URL name for clarity. Lastly, scores will continue to be accepted for 5 years past the test date, so IHEs will continue to accept TSIA1 scores well past the launch of TSIA2. The important thing to note is that scores cannot be mixed. If a student passed TSIA1 reading but not TSIA1 writing, they will have to be retested with the new TSIA2 ELAR test. All TSIA2 tests, except for the essay, are computer adaptive. In an adaptive test, a pool of test items have been written to the various content areas of each test. Each test question has been calibrated for difficulty and other characteristics. The tests are tailored to each test taker using an item selection algorithm based on a weighted deviations model. During testing, the first question presented is of medium difficulty and is chosen randomly from several starter questions of the same level of difficulty. If a test taker answers the question incorrectly, the next question to be administered is chosen from a group of easier questions. If the test taker answers the question correctly, the next question presented will be slightly more difficult. The test delivery system continues this process throughout the test, choosing the next question that is expected to yield the most information about the test taker. To assure that the test is balanced in content and that the kinds of questions presented don't differ greatly from one test taker to another, except in difficulty, a number of constraints are built into the program. These constraints guide the selection of questions to be administered so that a balance is achieved regardless of the skill level of the individual. TSIA2 is a suite of online computer adaptive tests. There are accommodated special format versions for students with disabilities called TSIA2 Companion. Accommodations must be determined prior to test day. Be sure to reference the CB Accommodations Guide to understand whether or not an accommodation needs approval. High school students taking the TSIA should contact their counselor, who will work with the IHE Disability Service Office, or DSO, to determine appropriate accommodations. Always refer to the CB Accommodations Guide document. On the screen, you'll see some of the things that can be given to students in terms of necessary accommodations. These include an accessibility wizard feature for the visually impaired, screen reader, save and finish later, paper pencil standard in large print, Braille, or a test purchased through an order form as a CD with manual scoring. This concludes the section focused on information about the new tests. Again, please be sure to note any questions and email them to the appropriate parties as listed on the second slide. In this section, we will be discussing proctoring eligibility and responsibilities for the TSIA2 test. There are various user types with different permissions levels within the testing platform. However, only the Proctor reporter and Proctor roles can actually administer tests. This slide compares the differences between the two roles, which is explanatory by its naming convention. Both roles can create vouchers and administer tests. However, only the Proctor reporter role can edit student profiles and run site-level reports. Proctors cannot be high school students. They must be responsible adults vetted by the institution. For security purposes, before gaining access to the testing platform, users, including proctors and Proctor reporters, must pass a certification test. Proctors must have their own login credentials and should not share them with anyone. Technical support may occasionally ask a user to provide login credentials to better assist with a technical inquiry, for example, to see what the user is seeing in order to target the issue. Sharing login credentials and passwords with technical support is up to the user's discretion. Should a user share login credentials with technical support, please note that they do not store or share logins or passwords. Once the issue has been resolved, users should change their password. Login credentials cannot be given to students in any medium. For example, they cannot be written on whiteboards, printed, emailed, or listed in students' institutional or personal portal. It is evident proctors want students to do well on their assessment. However, to remove any possible investment in the student's outcome of their test, a best practice when administering TSIA 2 is to have staff administer a test not related to their discipline. For example, a math faculty member should not administer a math test. An ELAR faculty member should not administer an English test, etc. Additionally, proctors cannot administer tests to their family members or friends and cannot be engaged with any commercial test prep company. To make cheating difficult and the job of the proctor a bit easier, it is recommended that computer stations be placed in a formation restricting the visibility of other computer screens, and that workstations be placed 5 feet apart or be separated by sound and light absorbing privacy dividers. Additionally, the recommended proctor to student ratio is 1 proctor per 15 to 20 students. Proctors must take required steps to, number 1, ensure test security, and number 2, safeguard against cheating. To ensure test security, proctors must keep all printed materials secure, collect and monitor all prohibited items, and distribute, collect, and shred all scratch paper. To safeguard against cheating, proctors must verify student identity and engage in active monitoring behavior throughout the duration of the testing session. It is the role of the proctor to check test taker identity before testing begins, upon re-entry after breaks, and at the end of testing if distributing score reports. This slide lists the full list of acceptable IDs with an explanation of ID requirements. If a student does not have an acceptable ID, the College Board official ID form is allowed. The ID form is located in the Resource tab on the platform. Student IDs should include student's name, recognizable photograph, and a signature. Acceptable forms of ID include driver's license, high school or college ID, state or federal ID card, military ID card, passport, tribal ID card, or naturalization card or certificate of citizenship. It is the role of the proctor to check for and collect all prohibited items before testing begins. This slide includes a partial list of prohibited items. A full list can be found in the program manual. As a rule of thumb, all electronic devices, or wearables, are prohibited from the testing center except for electronic medical devices. Prohibited items include, but are not limited to, cell phones, student-owned laptops, computers, or Chromebooks, any device capable of recording audio or taking photos, calculators, unless for a prescribed accommodation, student-provided keyboards, computers, or other assistive devices, unless for a prescribed accommodation, dictionaries or other reference materials, and paper of any kind. Scratch paper must be provided and destroyed by the test center administrator. This slide describes the processes involved for test violations. Using your due diligence as a proctor can prohibit this scenario from occurring. If a student is observed using a prohibited item such as a cell phone or other electronic device during the administration of a test, the proctor should follow the steps below. Number 1, stop the test session. You can do that from the testing dashboard. Number 2, review the device. Check the device for sent or received test content. If possible, do not return the device to the test taker or delete any images or messages until it has been determined that test items have been compromised or cheating has occurred. Number 3, consult your site manager. Your site manager is your assistant principal at the high school, or your counselor at the middle school who oversee TSIA testing, or Ms. Reniger at the district central office. Determining if a test session should be invalidated is a local decision. Number 4, notify the College Board. If test content was compromised, email accuplacer@collegeboard.org. Do not send screenshots to that email address. Flag the message as urgent and include test violation in the subject line. Include only the following student information: student name or ID, the XNUM, which is found at the bottom of the ISR, testing date and location, the test name, and the test question number. From the XNUM, the College Board will be able to gather all the necessary information to determine if cheating has occurred. The testing platform has 2 built-in security features: test session lockout and save and finish later. If a test taker opens another web browser or clicks outside of the testing window, the test session will lock and will require a proctor's login credentials for testing to resume. Additionally, the platform allows for test takers to save their work and finish at a later time if needed. For test security and fairness, this feature is not allowed for the essay test. If used for any multiple choice test, testing will resume at the same question number but with a different question. The test session remains live for 14 days. This concludes the section focused on the role of the proctor. Please email any specific questions to Lisa Reniger at the District Central Office. We just discussed the important role that proctors play in ensuring test honesty and security. We will now transition to talking about test administration. There are 3 test administration options. First is the standard face-to-face on-campus proctoring with social distancing, where tests can be started on demand or by using a standard print voucher. The second is the use of a video chat service, for example, Zoom, Teams, or WebEx, for virtual proctoring during this pandemic, where institutions' proctors can administer tests using a standard print voucher. Third is the use of live remote virtual proctoring to administer tests using a remote virtual voucher. Please note there is an added fee for use of this service. As a reminder, automated AI VRP options are not allowed for TSIA 2. In addition to on-demand testing, where students can walk into a test center and take the TSIA 2 with or without an appointment, institutions have the ability to manage testing by issuing vouchers, where student data is populated into the testing platform in advance of test day to simplify their registration and pre-testing experience on test day. Vouchers are beneficial when testing large groups of students. This slide illustrates your institution's required actions both before and on test day. Before the test day, all proctors must take and pass the certification test on the Accuplacer website to become certified proctors. You must consult device policy and requirements for devices, verify the systems check. On test day, check the student ID, collect prohibited items, pass out scratch paper, distribute vouchers if applicable, administer the test either on demand or with a voucher, carefully monitor testing, recheck student IDs if the students take a break, collect scratch paper, and finally return prohibited items and run any required reports. To ensure a smooth testing experience for your students, we recommend that you check to make sure your computers on campus or individual student computers for those testing virtually meet the minimum specifications required to administer the tests. To do so, go to the TSIA2 homepage at tsia2.accuplacer.org and scroll down until you see the Verify System button. This process looks at all of the features required for the test to be administered successfully, including your browser type and pop-up blockers, and gives a pass or fail status for each category with a notation in the upgrades column if action is needed. Pop-up blockers must be turned off, and you may need an MFL plugin for math problems to be displayed properly. Administering a test can only be done with a Proctor reporter or a Proctor credential. Follow this 8-step process for administering tests using a standard administration. Number 1, log into the platform at www.tsia2.accuplacer.org. Number 2, click on Administer Test from the left side of the navigation panel. Number 3, click on Administer New Test Session. Number 4, choose Branching Profile, Tests from the drop-down menu. Number 5, click on Administer Test. Number 6, instruct students to read and accept the student privacy policy. Number 7, instruct students to read the instructions and then click Close. And number 8, instruct students to enter their demographic information and then click Start Test. The purpose of this slide is to make note of the 2 fields for student IDs, primary and supplemental. It is critical that institutions follow the recommended guidelines provided by the College Board and TEA to ensure correct matching can occur. Student IDs must be entered on the student demographic page on test day and used to search for scores in the student portal. If using vouchers to administer the test, student IDs will be entered when creating the vouchers. Since higher ed and K-12 have different student IDs, these 2 fields allow the ability to capture both, if applicable, which will help with TEA matching. On this slide are a few scenarios related to student IDs when taking the TSIA2. In scenario 1, the test taker is a college student testing in a college, and the student is testing under an IHE account. The primary ID would be the local IHE number, and the supplemental ID would be left blank. Scenario 2, a test taker is a high school student testing at a high school and testing under a district or high school account. The primary ID is the Texas or TSDS unique 10-digit number, and the supplemental ID is optional, which could be a local high school ID. Scenario 3, the test taker is a local high school student testing at a high school, but testing under an IHE account. The primary ID is the local IHE number, and the supplemental ID could be the Texas TSDS unique 10-digit number. In scenario 4, the test taker is a high school student testing in a college and testing in an IHE account. The primary ID in this case would be the local IHE number. The purpose of this slide is to go through the steps required to administer a test for students using a voucher. Vouchers require work ahead of time, but can be helpful when testing large groups of students. Administering a test can only be done with a Proctor reporter or Proctor credential. This slide shows the steps for both the student and the proctor when using vouchers. The student begins by, number 1, going to the home page, number 2, clicking Use Voucher, and number 3, waiting for the proctor to approve their test session. The proctor then, number 1, from their computer, logs in. Number 2, clicks on Dashboard menu. Number 3, then clicks on Test Center Management. And number 4, then approves the test session. Administering a test can only be done with a proctor or proctor reporter credential. This slide provides a visual of the steps the student is required to complete when using vouchers for test administration. The student begins by, number 1, going to the home page at www.tsia2.accuplacer.org. Number 2, clicking Use Voucher. Number 3, then waiting for the proctor to approve their test session. It is very important to remind the student to stop and wait when they see the stop sign on their screen until their test is approved. This slide shows the steps for the proctor when using vouchers. Steps for the proctor. Number 1, from the proctor's computer, go to the platform homepage and log in to www.tsia2.accuplacer.org. Number 2, click on Dashboard menu. Number 3, click on Test Center Management. Number 4, a list of students who are waiting for approval will appear on the bottom of the screen. Click on Waiting for Approval located right under Today's Sessions on the black bar in the middle of the screen. Click Select All. Click Approve Request. Refresh your screen and repeat the approval steps until all students' tests are launched. Continue to measure students' progress from the dashboard. As previously mentioned, students have the ability to save their test session for another time or day. Students must return to complete their test session within 14 days. If utilized, the student will resume their test on the same question number but with a different question. Not resuming with the same test question is a built-in security measure. This feature is not allowed with the essay right placer. Should a test session have to end before a student completes their essay right placer, they could test another day but should be given a different prompt. The purpose of this slide is to provide a visual of the steps required to resume a test from an open test session. Resuming a test can only be done with a Proctor reporter or Proctor credential. There is a 5-step process to resuming tests. Number 1, log into the platform at www.tsia2.accuplacer.org. Number 2, click on Administer Test on the navigation panel. Number 3, click on Manage Test Session. Number 4, choose the date range, making sure the status is selected to open, and then click Search. Number 5, click on Resume next to the appropriate student's name. This concludes the section focused on test administration. We just discussed the different options for test administration. We will now transition to talking about the student experience and TSIA2 resources. The first chart explains the range of scores for the CRC tests between 910 and 990 and diagnostic levels between 2 and 6. The score range on the CRC of 910 to 990 was purposefully set to a different range than the current version to avoid confusion and help advisors and educators easily differentiate between the two TSI versions. Remember, test scores are valid from 5 years from the date of testing for both TSIA1 and TSIA2. If a student takes the diagnostic test, their results will be reported in levels 2 through 6 and have proficiency descriptors of Basic, Proficient, and Advanced. Please note that levels 1 and 2 have been combined, so the lowest level a student could receive is a 2. The TSIA2 diagnostic test will not report a score of 1 to 15 as is reported on the current or former version. The second chart explains the scores and levels that are necessary for a student to meet the CR benchmarks. It is important that students know there are 2 opportunities, second chance, for them to demonstrate college readiness or CR for both ELAR and mathematics. If students go into the diagnostic session for either ELAR or mathematics, they need to continue to do their best for 2 reasons. Number 1, students can score at a level that meets the CR benchmarks, and number 2, to ensure that their TSIA2 Learning Resources Locator code is reflective of the skills that they need to improve. This slide provides a visual and explains the 2 opportunities for students to meet the CR or college readiness benchmarks. Passing scores on both the ELAR classification test and the essay right placer are required to receive the college readiness classification for ELAR. The first opportunity to demonstrate CR is a score of 945 or higher on the ELAR classification test and a score of 5 or higher on the essay right placer. This is the student's first opportunity to demonstrate CR. Students scoring at or below 944 on the classification test will be branched to the diagnostic test. If they receive a level of 4 or higher on the diagnostic test, they will be branched to the essay right placer. If a student scores a 5 or higher on the essay right placer and they have a diagnostic level of 5 or higher, they will receive a CR classification. This is the student's second opportunity to demonstrate CR. Students scoring below a 4 on the diagnostic test will not take the essay Right Placer test. They will be given a locator code to access the learning resources where they can create a plan for skill improvement. This slide provides a visual and explains the two opportunities for students to meet the Mathematics College Readiness or CR benchmark. Students must score a 950 or higher on the Mathematics CRC test to be considered college ready at their first opportunity. Students scoring at or below a 949 on the classification test will be branched to the diagnostic test. If they receive a level 6 on the diagnostic test, they will be considered college ready at their second opportunity. Students scoring at or below a 5 on the diagnostic test will be given a locator code to access the learning resources where they can create a plan for skill improvement. This slide shows the location of the student portal and how to navigate the resources found there. Students can go to www.tsia.accuplacer.org to access this portal. Click on Information for Students. There are 4 links that students will use. Number 1, your Accuplacer score report. Number 2, Test Center Locator. Number 3, Test Taking Tutorials. And number 4, Texas Resources. The Test Center link is useful if a student needs to locate a test center close to their residence. Student Score Share is a free service for students to send their scores to other institutions. There are 2 ways students can elect to share their scores. Number 1, on test day, students have the option to automatically have their test scores sent to 3 institutions free of charge. This feature is located on the student demographic page. Remember, student test scores are automatically available in the account where the student is testing. The student does not need to send their scores to the institution for the account where the student is testing. Number 2, after test day, students can access their scores through the student portal. The student completes the fields on this screen. The student will then receive an email with a link to access their individual score report, or ISR. After the student opens the email, the student will click on Send Scores. The student can enter up to 3 institutions to receive their scores. If a student wants to send to more than 3 institutions, they will repeat the process. This slide explains the value and functionality of the sample questions and the web-based study app. Students are encouraged to prepare for testing by reviewing the free sample questions and/or accessing the free web-based study app to familiarize themselves with the test experience and the types of questions asked on the TSI assessments. Through the free web-based TSIA2 study app, students will get access to official practice tests. Students can access the study app on their computer, smartphone, or tablet. There are 2 components to the study app. Number 1, Learn as you go, and number 2, Practice Test. The Learn as you go feature includes rationale for why the student gets the question correct or incorrect. The Practice Test features allow them to get the same look and feel as a real test. The study app is useful for faculty and teachers who are also interested in reviewing the tests. It is important for students to prepare and practice for placement testing. The newly added tutorial videos will assist students with preparation in these areas. Please make sure your students know about these important resources. There's a highlighter, calculators, and a keyboard and mouse available. The video tutorials are available from the student portal before testing and during testing. The intent of this slide is to help testing personnel understand the value and benefits of the TSIA2 Learning Resource Library so that they are prepared to answer questions from faculty and teachers. TSIA2 Learning Resources are a free online library of instructional and practice materials aligned to TSIA2 content available to both students and educators. Comprised of vetted open education resources, materials may include printable or interactive worksheets, tutorials, and instructional videos. There are 2 types of access. Number 1, general, and number 2, individualized. General access. At any time, a student or educator can enter the site to browse or search all resources. No credentials are needed. Student individualized access. For students that do not meet the TSIA-2 college readiness benchmarks, diagnostic test and/or essay right placer results are used to generate an individual LLC, which will be printed on their ISR. The LLC provides the student with access to an individualized set of practice and instructional materials based on diagnostic test performance. Separate LLCs are provided for each subject area. Educator individualized access. Educators can quickly create an account which provides access to additional site features. For example, save custom assignments created from library materials, share assignments electronically to students and colleagues, and upload resources to a library. During testing, if a student gets an error message on their screen, the first line of defense is your local technology department to make sure the error is not a local issue. If you determine it is not a local issue, contact customer service from the link at the bottom of the student's screen. If you have any questions, you have several options for assistance. Phone. The phone support number is 866-607-5223. You may also use the live chat feature where a human being will actually reply, or you may submit a help ticket if you cannot reach customer service. This concludes the basic training for TSIA-2 proctors. Thank you for your attention. Please send any specific questions to Ms. Reniger at Central Office or your campus administrator. Thank you.